My family told everyone I was a failure. I sat quietly at my brother's governor's gala, and then the governor looked at me and whispered, "Wait, you're the one?" The whole room went silent. Even my father couldn't speak. The moment years of being dismissed, overlooked, and outright betrayed by my own family finally collided with undeniable, public vindication. What if the very people who branded you a failure were suddenly forced to confront your monumental success, live, in front of the entire elite establishment? The air in the grand ballroom felt thick with the hum of Boston's power players, a shimmering tapestry of crystal chandeliers, hushed conversations, and the clink of expensive glasses. I sat alone at a discreet corner table of Governor Sterling's annual gala, an elegant shadow in my simple black dress, watching my brother, Caleb, the golden boy, effortlessly work the room. For 34 years, my family, the mighty Hayes, had labeled me the disappointment, the cautionary tale. Tonight, I was just another face in the crowd. Until the governor himself, James Sterling, approached, his eyes scanning the table, then widening in a flash of recognition as they met mine. "Wait, you're Senator Hayes," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the string quartet. Across the opulent room, Caleb's perfectly composed face drained of all color. In that instant, years of family dismissal, of silent betrayal, collapsed around him. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who should believe in you most, stay right here with me. Let's talk about how being deemed the failure became my greatest power. Growing up as a Hayes meant something in Boston. Our name wasn't just a label, it was a legacy, etched onto university buildings, splashed across newspaper society pages, and a golden key that unlocked doors for us that remained stubbornly shut for others. The Hayes dynasty was built on banking, business, and maintaining appearances at all costs. My parents, Arthur and Eleanor Hayes, had a very clear blueprint for their children: academic excellence, an Ivy League degree, a respectable career in finance or law, a good marriage, and, above all, absolutely no controversy. From my earliest memories, it was obvious that Caleb embodied everything they envisioned for a Hayes heir. He was handsome, athletic, charismatic, with an easy charm that made him popular wherever he went. Caleb played by every single rule, instinctively understanding the unwritten social codes of our privileged world. When he brought home straight A's, my father, Arthur, would practically glow with pride. When he became captain of the lacrosse team, my mother, Eleanor, hosted an elaborate dinner party just to celebrate. I was different. Not rebellious, not intentionally, but I was curious in ways that clearly made my parents uncomfortable. Where Caleb accepted our family's worldview without question, I dared to ask why. While he schmoozed at country club events, I disappeared into books about history, about government, about how the world really worked. My parents, bless their hearts, tolerated what they called my phase of intense intellectual curiosity, assuming I'd eventually snap back into line. The first real crack in their facade appeared during my sophomore year of high school. My English teacher assigned a project analyzing a contemporary political issue. While most kids chose safe topics, I picked a controversial environmental policy that directly clashed with the interests of several companies tied to our family's investment portfolio. My research was meticulous, my analysis nuanced, and my presentation earned the highest grade in the class. Instead of praise, my parents were utterly horrified when they heard about it from another parent at a charity function. "Do you have any idea how this makes us look?" my father demanded that night, pacing our mahogany-paneled study like a caged tiger. "The Harringtons were there, Harper. The Harringtons. Their foundation is considering a major partnership with us, and now they think we've raised some sort of radical environmentalist." But my research was accurate, I argued, my voice trembling slightly. "The data shows these policies are harmful. Isn't the truth important?" My mother sighed, that familiar look of disappointment clouding her features. "Darling, there's the truth, and then there's what's appropriate. You need to learn the difference." And that, tragically, became the pattern. When I joined the debate team instead of cheerleading, like my mother had, it was impractical. When I expressed interest in political science instead of business or pre-law, it was rebellious. Every single choice I made that deviated from the Hayes blueprint was treated as a personal affront to our family's sacred legacy. By senior year, the contrast between Caleb and me couldn't have been more stark. He'd already been accepted early decision to Harvard, following in our father's footsteps. Caleb moved through life with the easy confidence of someone who had never questioned their path or purpose. Meanwhile, I found myself drawn to issues of social justice and political reform. I volunteered at a local campaign office, completely fascinated by the process of governance and policy creation. The campaign workers didn't care about my family name. They cared about my ideas, my work ethic. For the first time, I felt valued for who I was, rather than how well I conformed to expectations. When college application season arrived, I made a decision that permanently altered my relationship with my parents. Despite having the grades and the legacy connections for an Ivy League acceptance, I chose to attend a well-respected state university with an exceptional political science program. The night I announced my decision, my father's face flushed crimson. "You're throwing away opportunities people would kill for," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "This isn't just about you, Harper. This is about generations of Hayes before you who worked to secure your future." "I'm not throwing anything away," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I'm choosing a different path." "A path to nowhere," my mother interjected, her tone dripping with disdain. "Political science? What does that even lead to? Government work? Campaigning for lost causes?" What neither of them could grasp was that I had discovered something they had never valued, a sense of purpose beyond wealth accumulation and social standing. In their eyes, I had committed the ultimate sin. I had looked at the life they prescribed, and I had decided it simply wasn't enough. As Caleb packed for Harvard that fall, relatives and family friends showered him with congratulations and advice. For me, there were tight smiles and questions that felt like accusations. "Are you sure about this choice, Harper? And isn't it still possible to transfer to somewhere more suitable?" What none of them knew was that beneath my calm exterior, I was nurturing political ambitions that would have truly shocked them all. I didn't just want to study politics. I wanted to change the system from within. But I kept these dreams to myself, knowing they would only provide my family with more ammunition against me. The day I left for college, my grandmother, Doris, slipped a small note into my hand. It read, "Be brave enough to be different. Someone has to." It was the only encouragement I received from anyone in my family, and I held on to it like a talisman through the challenges ahead. The University of Massachusetts. Campus couldn't have been more different from the ivy-covered walls and exclusive clubs of Harvard. Here, merit mattered more than family connections, and diversity of thought wasn't just tolerated, it was encouraged. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free to explore ideas without the crushing weight of familial judgment. During my first semester, I enrolled in a political theory course taught by Professor Evelyn Foster, a former legislative director who had left Washington to shape the next generation of political thinkers. From the moment she called on me in that first class, challenging my analysis of a Supreme Court decision, I knew I had found a mentor who would push me to think more deeply than ever before. "You have a natural instinct for policy analysis," Professor Foster told me after class one day. "But you need to learn to trust your voice. Your ideas matter, Miss Hayes." Those words, so simple yet so profound, were like water in a desert. No one in my family had ever suggested that my ideas mattered. They had only cared about how my ideas reflected on them. While I immersed myself in political theory and constitutional law, Caleb was thriving at Harvard. My parents' social media accounts featured endless photos. Caleb at business school events, Caleb networking with family connections, Caleb interning at prestigious financial firms. Our paths couldn't have diverged more dramatically. During my sophomore year, I joined a campus advocacy group focused on educational equity. We organized peacefully, researched thoroughly, and presented data-driven solutions to the university administration. When our efforts resulted in expanded scholarship opportunities for low-income students, I experienced a kind of fulfillment I had never known before. This wasn't abstract theory. This was creating tangible change in people's lives. My growing passion for advocacy made holiday breaks increasingly tense. What had once been subtle disapproval from my family had hardened into open dismissal of my interests and achievements. At Thanksgiving of my junior year, Caleb regaled the table with stories of his summer internship at a top investment bank. My father beamed with pride, asking detailed questions about Caleb's networking connections and mentors. "And what about you, Harper?" my Aunt Carol asked during a lull in conversation. "Are you still doing that political thing?" Before I could even answer, my father interjected. "Harper is still finding herself," he said with a dismissive wave. "Hopefully, she'll get serious before graduation." I stared at my plate, swallowing both my response and my hurt. "Actually," I said quietly, "I've been offered a campaign position for Senator Thompson this summer." The table fell silent. My mother forced a tight smile. "How interesting. Will it pay well?" "It's about the experience, not the money," I replied. My father scoffed. "Experience doesn't pay student loans, Harper." "My scholarships cover most of my tuition," I reminded him, though he knew this well. "Scholarships that could have gone to someone who actually needed them if you had just accepted Harvard's legacy admission," my mother added, her tone making it clear this was an old argument. Caleb, to his credit, attempted to change the subject, but the damage was done. Once again, I was the family disappointment, pursuing that political thing instead of a proper career. Professor Foster became my refuge during these years. She recognized my growing interest in progressive politics and connected me with opportunities to learn campaign organizing firsthand. Under her guidance, I volunteered for local candidates, learning the unglamorous but essential aspects of political work: phone banking, data analysis, voter outreach. "Politics isn't just about grand ideas," she told me. "It's about showing up, doing the unglamorous work, and building relationships with the people you want to serve." By senior year, I had built a remarkable resume of political experience, culminating in managing a successful city council campaign for a first-time candidate. When I was offered a full-time position with a nonprofit focused on voter education after graduation, I felt like my unconventional path was finally bearing fruit. My family saw it differently. When I announced my post-graduation plans during Christmas break, my father's response was swift and brutal. "That's enough," he said, setting down his whiskey glass with a sharp click. "We've indulged this hobby of yours for 4 years, Harper. It's time to grow up and get a real job." "This is a real job," I insisted. "Important work that makes a difference." "A difference to whom?" my mother asked, her voice laced with mockery. "Certainly not to your future or to this family's reputation." "We've been patient," my father continued. "We've allowed you to attend that school, pursue this interest, but there are limits to our patience and our support." His meaning became terrifyingly clear the next morning when he informed me that they would no longer provide any financial assistance after graduation. No help with an apartment, no family health insurance coverage, nothing. "You're choosing this path," he said coldly. "You can deal with the consequences." Caleb witnessed this conversation from the doorway. His expression was caught somewhere between sympathy for me and relief that he wasn't the target of our father's disappointment. In that agonizing moment, I realized that my brother was as trapped in the family's expectations as I had been. He just happened to fit the mold they had created. I left Boston the day after Christmas, returning to campus early. That night, alone in my dorm room, I made a fierce promise to myself. I would forge my own path, with or without my family's blessing. I would prove that success could be measured by impact rather than income. And someday, they would have to acknowledge that I had been right to follow my conscience. I had no idea then just how dramatic that vindication would be. My first apartment after college was a far cry from the Hayes family estate. A 5th-floor walk-up with unreliable heat and a shared bathroom. It was all I could afford on my nonprofit salary. Each month was a financial tightrope walk, juggling student loan payments, rent, groceries, and the professional wardrobe required for political work. Meanwhile, Caleb had graduated with honors and immediately stepped into a 6-figure position at a prestigious consulting firm. His Instagram showcased business-class flights, luxury apartments, and networking events with Boston's elite. My parents made sure everyone in their social circle knew about Caleb's meteoric rise. The voter education nonprofit where I worked was chronically underfunded, but vitally important. We developed educational materials about the electoral process, conducted registration drives in underserved communities, and worked to increase civic participation among young voters. The hours were long, the pay was minimal, but the work felt meaningful in ways I couldn't fully articulate to anyone who hadn't experienced it. Family gatherings became exercises in endurance. At my cousin's wedding, I overheard my mother explaining my career choice to a family friend. Harper is still in her idealistic phase, working for some voter thing. We're hoping she'll come to her senses soon. Thanksgiving that year brought matters to a breaking point. Caleb arrived with news of his promotion and a massive bonus. My parents were ecstatic, opening an expensive bottle of champagne to celebrate. When the conversation reluctantly turned to me, I shared that our voter education initiative had helped increase youth turnout by 12% in recent local elections. My father swirled his champagne, looking profoundly unimpressed. And how exactly does that translate to a career path, Harper? It's already my career, I replied. We're making democracy more accessible. He set down his glass with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of all his disappointments. Let me be direct. You're 30 years old, living in what I can only imagine is a substandard apartment, making what, $40,000 a year? With your education and connections, this is, frankly, a waste. The room fell silent. Even Caleb looked uncomfortable. Arthur, my mother murmured, though whether she was encouraging him to continue or stop wasn't clear. No, Eleanor, it needs to be said. We've watched this experiment for years now. Harper, you had every advantage, every opportunity, and you've squandered them all on this hobby. Your brother is buying his first property while you can barely make rent. This isn't success by any measure. I stood up, my hands shaking. Success isn't measured only by money, Dad. In the real world, it absolutely is, he replied dismissively. I left the table, grabbing my coat. As I headed for the door, I heard my mother call after me, but I couldn't bear another minute of their judgment. In my car, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not just for the cruel words, but for the agonizing realization that my family might never see value in the path I had chosen. That night, alone in my apartment, doubts crept in. Was I fooling myself? Was my work making any real difference? Would I always be struggling financially while my peers advanced in conventional careers? For the first time, I seriously questioned whether I should abandon my political aspirations and find a more lucrative, family-approved profession. The turning point came 2 weeks later at a community forum our organization had arranged. A young single mother approached me after the event, her eyes bright with purpose. Before your program, I never voted, she told me, her voice thick with emotion. Never thought it mattered for people like me. Now my daughter sees me researching candidates, filling out my ballot. She knows her voice will matter, too, someday. That's because of you. Her words, simple yet powerful, restored my wavering faith. This was why I had chosen this path, not for wealth or status, but to help people recognize their own power in our democracy. Around this time, I met Owen Foster at a political fundraiser. The son of my former professor, Owen worked as a communications director for a progressive state representative. Tall, with thoughtful green eyes and a quick mind, Owen was the first person who seemed to truly understand my passion for political work without questioning its validity. So, you're the famous Harper Hayes, he said when Professor Foster introduced us. My mother says you're going to be governor someday. I laughed off the compliment, but something about Owen's genuine interest in my ideas made me feel seen in a way I rarely experienced. Our first date stretched into a 5-hour conversation about electoral reform, community organizing, and our shared vision for a more inclusive democracy. With Owen's encouragement and my growing network of political connections, I made a decision that shocked everyone who knew me. I would run for city council. At 31, with no family support and limited finances, it seemed like an impossible goal. But I had built strong relationships in the community through my nonprofit work, and I understood the issues facing ordinary citizens in ways that many politicians didn't. When I told my family about my candidacy, their reactions were predictably dismissive. City council? My mother repeated, as if I'd announced plans to join the circus. "Harper, be serious." "I am serious," I replied. "I've already filed the paperwork." "This is embarrassing," my father said flatly. "You'll lose, waste what little money you have, and then what?" "Have you thought this through at all?" "Actually, I have a campaign manager, a treasurer, and a growing team of volunteers," I explained, trying to keep my voice even. "We've developed a solid campaign strategy focused on community engagement." Caleb, who had recently begun working for rising political star Governor Sterling, looked uncomfortable. "Politics is more complicated than you realize, Harper," he said. "It's not just about good intentions." "I'm well aware," I replied, biting back a sharper response. It was typical of my family to assume I was naive, rather than consider that I might actually be qualified. My grassroots campaign was nothing like the big-budget operations I would later encounter. We operated out of a borrowed office space, relied heavily on volunteers, and focused on direct voter contact. I knocked on thousands of doors personally, listening to residents' concerns and sharing my vision for a more responsive local government. The night of the election, Owen and I gathered with our small team at a neighborhood restaurant. When the results showed I had won by a narrow margin, the room erupted in cheers. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of politics, but it felt monumental. My phone remained silent that night. No congratulations from my family, despite the fact that the local paper had covered my win. When I finally received a text from Caleb the next day, it was characteristically backhanded. "Congrats on the council seat." Small pond, but I guess it's a start. My mother's eventual response was similarly qualified. "We're surprised by your win." The district must have had a very low threshold for candidates. Their inability to acknowledge my legitimate achievement only strengthened my resolve. I would prove my worth, not through their measure of success, but through effective public service that improved people's lives. And I would do it without the Hayes name opening any doors. My first term on the city council was a crash course in practical governance. I quickly discovered that effective public service required more than good intentions. It demanded strategic thinking, coalition building, and a thick skin. I threw myself into the work, focusing on initiatives to increase affordable housing, improve public transportation, and create more transparent city government. To my surprise, I found I had a natural talent for the detailed policy work that many elected officials avoided. I could digest complex reports, identify practical solutions, and build consensus among diverse stakeholders. My background in community organizing proved invaluable for connecting policy decisions to their real-world impacts on constituents. 6 months into my term, a local reporter wrote a profile highlighting my effectiveness in office despite my youth and lack of traditional political connections. The article mentioned my family background only in passing, noting that I had forged a path independent from her prominent Boston family. The profile caught the attention of several state-level political operatives who began to see me as a rising talent worth watching. Meanwhile, Caleb had solidified his position as chief of staff to Governor Sterling, who had recently won the governorship. My brother's face appeared regularly in state political coverage, always at Governor Sterling's side, always the picture of polished professionalism. Our parents never missed an opportunity to highlight Caleb's proximity to power. At family events, conversations inevitably turned to Caleb's insider stories about the governor's mansion or policy initiatives he was helping shape. Caleb was telling the governor just yesterday. My mother would begin at dinner parties while I sat silently, picking at my food. My work on the city council was treated as a curious hobby in comparison. Despite this persistent dismissal, my reputation as an effective public servant continued to grow. By the end of my first term, I had successfully championed several significant policy initiatives that improved daily life for my constituents. Local media began to speculate about my future political prospects, suggesting I might be well-positioned for higher office. When a state Senate seat in my district unexpectedly opened due to the incumbent's health issues, a coalition of community leaders and progressive organizations approached me about running. The opportunity was both exciting and intimidating. A state Senate race would require significantly more resources and would face much greater scrutiny than my city council campaign. After careful consideration and many long conversations with Owen, who had become not just my partner in life, but my most trusted political advisor, I decided to enter the race. The night before my public announcement, I called my parents, hoping that my growing record of public service might have softened their opposition. My mother answered, her voice cooling noticeably when she realized it was me. When I shared my plans to run for state senate, the line went quiet for several seconds. "Harper," she finally said, her voice tight with restraint. "Don't you think this has gone far enough? This political adventure of yours?" "Mom, this isn't an adventure. This is my career, my calling. I'm good at this work, and it matters." "What matters," she replied, "is that you're continuing to alienate yourself from this family. Do you have any idea how difficult it is for us to explain your choices to our friends? To have one child working respectably with the governor while the other insists on this public crusading." "I'm not asking for your approval anymore," I said quietly. "I'm 33 years old. I'm just letting you know out of courtesy." "If you announce this campaign," she said, her voice hardening, "do not expect any support from us, financial or otherwise. You will be completely on your own." "I've been on my own for years, Mom. Nothing new there." The line went silent again before she spoke with chilling finality. "I really thought you would outgrow this phase, Harper. Your father, and I can't keep watching you throw your life away on these political fantasies. When you're ready to make sensible choices, we'll be here. Until then, perhaps it's best if we have some distance." The call ended without resolution, leaving me with the dawning realization that pursuing my political ambitions might mean permanently sacrificing my relationship with my family. It was a steep price, but I had come too far to turn back now. The state senate campaign was grueling. My opponents used my family's lack of support against me, subtly suggesting that even those who knew me best didn't trust my judgment. Anonymous quotes appeared in political coverage. "The Hayes family has a long tradition of public service through business and philanthropy. Harper's approach is considered unconventional within the family." Through it all, Owen remained my rock. After a particularly difficult campaign day, he surprised me by proposing in the quiet of our apartment. No grand gestures, just sincere words and a simple ring that represented our partnership of equals. "Whatever happens with this election," he said, "I want you to know that someone believes in you completely." Despite being outspent and facing established political opponents, my grassroots campaign resonated with voters tired of business as usual politics. On election night, when the results confirmed my victory, I allowed myself a moment of pure vindication. I had achieved this without family connections, without family money, without family support. At my swearing-in ceremony, I scanned the audience, knowing I wouldn't see my parents or Caleb, but hoping against hope that something might have changed. The only familiar family face in the crowd belonged to my grandmother, Doris, now using a walker, but beaming with unmistakable pride. "I always knew you were meant for something extraordinary," she whispered when I embraced her after the ceremony. "Not in spite of your differences from the family, but because of them." Her presence was a balm, but the absence of my parents and brother left a hollow space that even electoral victory couldn't fill. As I took my seat in the state senate chambers for the first time, I wondered if any achievement would ever be enough to bridge the divide between the life my family had planned for me and the one I had chosen for myself. My first term in the state senate proved transformative. Rather than grandstanding or pursuing headline-grabbing initiatives, I focused on the unglamorous, but essential work of crafting sound legislation. I developed a reputation as someone who did her homework, asked insightful questions, and could work across partisan lines to achieve practical results. The local press began referring to me as the policy wank with a purpose. Not the most exciting political brand, but one that earned respect from colleagues and constituents alike. I specialized in education policy, healthcare access, and government transparency, areas where my detailed approach could make tangible differences in people's lives. By my third year in office, I had successfully sponsored 17 bills that were signed into law, an unusual achievement for a first-term senator from the minority party. My effectiveness drew attention from national party leaders searching for talent to develop for higher office. Meanwhile, Caleb's star continued to rise alongside Governor Sterling's. My brother had fully embraced his role as the governor's right hand, appearing frequently in state media as the administration's spokesperson. Our parents' social media accounts regularly featured photos with Caleb and the governor at official functions, their pride unmistakable. The divide between us had calcified into complete estrangement. I heard about family events only through occasional updates from my grandmother, Doris, who maintained contact despite my parents' disapproval. According to Doris, my parents had developed a standard response when asked about me at social functions. "Harper is pursuing her own path," a phrase designed to sound supportive while conveying absolutely nothing. Owen and I had settled into a fulfilling life together. We married in a small ceremony attended by close friends and political allies, with my grandmother as the only family representative. When my parents declined the invitation with a curt note citing prior commitments, I felt the final door close on any hope of reconciliation. The unexpected opportunity arose during my 4th year in the state Senate. A U.S. Senate seat was coming open in a special election following a senior senator's retirement due to health concerns. The compressed timeline meant a fast-paced, high-stakes campaign with national implications. When party leadership approached me about running, my initial reaction was hesitation. A U.S. Senate campaign would mean intense scrutiny, not just of my political record, but of my personal life, including the family estrangement I had largely kept private. "They'll use your family against you," Owen warned during our late-night discussion. "They'll find ways to suggest that if your own family doesn't support you, voters shouldn't either." "I know," I sighed, staring at the ceiling of our bedroom. But is that reason enough to step aside? To let someone else take this opportunity? What complicated matters further were the specific circumstances of the political moment. Several critical pieces of legislation affecting education funding and healthcare access, my core issues, were expected to come before the Senate in the coming term, with votes likely to be decided by the narrowest of margins. The possibility of influencing these national policies was incredibly compelling. After days of deliberation, I made my decision. I would run, but with an unusual strategy. I would keep a deliberately low media profile, focusing on substance over personality and retail politics over splashy events. This approach aligned with both my natural strengths and the necessity of minimizing opportunities for my family situation to become the story. "It's unconventional," admitted my campaign manager, Sarah Jenkins, when I outlined the strategy. "But it might actually work. People are tired of political celebrities. They want someone who puts in the work." The campaign required a level of discipline and focus unlike anything I had previously experienced. I immersed myself in policy briefings, participated in small community forums rather than large rallies, and authorized my team to decline most national media requests. I appeared in carefully selected local outlets where I could discuss substantive issues without being reduced to family drama. This approach confused my opponents, who were accustomed to candidates eager for any media exposure. Their confusion turned to concern when internal polling showed my message resonating with voters tired of political theater. Through indirect channels, I learned that Caleb had taken notice of my campaign. As Governor Sterling's chief of staff, he now occupied a position of significant influence in state politics. Though he made no public statements about my candidacy, I heard from mutual connections that he had privately expressed dismissive views about my chances. What I didn't know until much later was that during a private dinner, my father had asked Caleb to use his influence with the governor to quietly undermine my campaign. To his credit, Caleb refused, though not out of loyalty to me, but because he recognized that such meddling could backfire politically if discovered. My parents' attitude toward my Senate run moved beyond disapproval to active embarrassment. Through my grandmother, I learned they had begun telling friends and associates that I had failed at politics and had unrealistic ambitions, a narrative so divorced from reality that it would have been laughable if it weren't so painful. "They just can't accept that you've succeeded on your own terms," Owen said, holding me one night when the weight of family rejection felt particularly heavy. "It contradicts everything they believe about success and the Hayes way." Security concerns added another layer of complexity to the campaign. As a female candidate gaining prominence in a heated political climate, I received threats that necessitated security precautions. These threats, combined with my strategy of limited public exposure, created an unusual situation where many voters supported my policy positions without being able to readily recognize me in person, a circumstance that would later prove critically important. The final weeks of the campaign were a blur of 18-hour days, endless policy discussions, and the growing possibility that we might actually win. On election night, surrounded by our closest supporters in a hotel conference room, Owen and I watched as the results defied conventional political wisdom. By a margin narrow enough to require careful verification, but clear enough to avoid a recount, I had won. At 36, I had become the youngest woman ever elected to represent our state in the U.S. Senate. The victory celebration was subdued and brief, fitting for a campaign that had prioritized substance over spectacle. There were no calls from my parents or Caleb, no acknowledgement of this historic achievement from the family that had once expected so much from me. As I prepared for the transition to Washington, I discovered through back channels that my family had intensified their narrative about my supposed failures. At Boston social functions, they spoke of me as someone who had never found her footing, a fiction maintained even as national publications were beginning to identify me as a rising political talent. This complete denial of reality reinforced my decision to maintain distance. I had a job to do in the Senate, constituents to represent, and policies to shape. The energy I might have spent trying to win my family's approval would be better directed toward the work ahead. The irony wasn't lost on me. In rejecting the path my family had chosen, I had achieved a position of influence far beyond what they had imagined possible. Yet, this success only seemed to deepen their resentment rather than earn their respect. As I was sworn into the United States Senate, placing my hand on the Constitution and pledging to faithfully execute my duties, I thought of my grandmother's words years earlier, "Be brave enough to be different." Someone has to. In that solemn moment, I silently thanked her for being the one person in my family who had seen my difference not as failure, but as strength. 6 months into my term as U.S. Senator, the work had consumed my life in the best possible way. I had secured positions on the Education and Healthcare committees, assignments that aligned perfectly with my policy expertise and priorities. Washington life was an adjustment, but Owen and I had settled into a comfortable routine, dividing our time between D.C. and our home state. My approach to the Senate mirrored my earlier political work, thorough, substantive, and focused on results rather than headlines. I worked diligently behind the scenes, building relationships with colleagues across the aisle and establishing myself as someone who did the necessary homework on complex issues. Due to the unusual circumstances of my election and my continued preference for substance over spectacle, I maintained a relatively low media profile. I participated in committee hearings, floor debates, and constituent meetings, but avoided the cable news circuit and political talk shows that consumed many of my colleagues' time. This strategy had an unexpected side effect. Outside of political circles and my home state, I wasn't immediately recognizable. I could often move through public spaces without the scrutiny many elected officials faced, a small luxury in the fishbowl of Washington politics. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning in June. Elegant, cream-colored cardstock with embossed lettering. Governor James Sterling requests the honor of your presence at the annual Governor's Gala benefiting the Children's Education Foundation. No personal note, just the formal invitation that presumably went to hundreds of political and business leaders across the state. I stared at it, knowing immediately that Caleb had to be involved in the guest list. As Governor Sterling's chief of staff, my brother oversaw such events. Was this an olive branch? A political calculation? Or simply an oversight? My name included on a list of elected officials without anyone realizing the family connection? Are you going to go? Owen asked that evening, finding me still, contemplating the invitation at our kitchen table. I don't know, I admitted. It feels like walking into the lion's den. Maybe it's time, he suggested gently. You've proven yourself beyond any reasonable doubt. You're a United States Senator, Harper. Maybe seeing you in that role will finally break through their denial. After days of deliberation, I decided to attend, not to seek approval or reconciliation, but to represent my office with the dignity it deserved. If my family chose to acknowledge me, fine. If not, I would conduct myself with the same professionalism I brought to every aspect of my work. The night of the gala, I chose a simple but elegant black dress, understated yet appropriate for the formal occasion. Owen, handsome in his tuxedo, squeezed my hand as our car approached the venue, a historic downtown hotel known for hosting the state's most prestigious events. "Remember who you are now," he whispered. "United States Senator Harper Hayes. You've earned your place here." The hotel's grand ballroom had been transformed for the occasion. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over elegantly appointed tables. A string quartet played softly as the state's political and business elite mingled, cocktails in hand. From the entrance, I immediately spotted Caleb across the room, confidently working the crowd in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. Every inch the political operator he had become. As Owen and I made our way into the room, I noted with a mixture of relief and disappointment that my parents weren't in attendance. Perhaps they had heard I would be there and chosen to avoid the potential awkwardness. We were shown to a table near the back of the room, far from the governor's table, where Caleb would undoubtedly be seated. The strategic placement wasn't lost on me, significant enough to acknowledge my office, but distant enough to minimize any family drama. Throughout the dinner service, I maintained my composure, engaging pleasantly with the other guests at our table, a university president, a hospital administrator and his wife, and a judge I had known from my state senate days. None of them mentioned my brother or questioned our separate seating, though I caught occasional curious glances between them. From across the room, I observed Caleb in his element, leaning in to whisper something to Governor Sterling, laughing at appropriate moments. The perfect political lieutenant. He had not once looked in my direction, though he surely knew I was there. Between the main course and dessert, I excused myself to visit the ladies' room. As I walked through the ballroom, I overheard snippets of conversation that made my stomach tighten. "That's the Hayes girl, isn't it? The one who?" The words faded as I passed. "I heard from Eleanor that she's never quite found her way. Such a shame with their family connections. Caleb is the successful one. On track to run for office himself in a few years, from what I hear." By the time I returned to the table, my confidence had been rattled. Despite everything I had accomplished, here in my home state, in these circles, I was still defined by my family's narrative. The failed Hayes. The disappointment. The cautionary tale. After dessert, Governor Sterling took to the podium to deliver his remarks. I half listened as he spoke about the importance of education and the Foundation's work. My thoughts still tangled in the overheard conversations. I barely registered when he announced he would be making his way around the room to personally thank key supporters. Lost in thought, I didn't immediately notice when a hush fell over our corner of the ballroom. Looking up, I found Governor Sterling himself approaching our table, flanked by aides and security. Caleb trailed slightly behind him, his attention on a notepad rather than the room. The governor stopped directly at our table, his eyebrows raising slightly as he focused on me. For a moment, confusion crossed his features before recognition dawned in his eyes. "Wait, you're Senator Hayes?" he asked, his voice low, but clearly surprised. The table went silent. Behind him, Caleb's head snapped up, his face draining of color as he realized what was happening. I stood, extending my hand professionally. "Yes, Governor. It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. Thank you for including me this evening." Governor Sterling clasped my hand warmly, his initial surprise transforming into genuine interest. "The Education Bill author. Your work on the Federal Education Committee has been remarkable. I had no idea you would be joining us tonight." From the corner of my eye, I could see Caleb frozen in place, his professional mask slipping to reveal naked shock. Around us, conversations had hushed as people strained to observe the interaction. "I've been meaning to discuss your healthcare access proposal," the governor continued, seemingly oblivious to the building tension. "It aligns with several initiatives we're considering at the state level. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting while you're in the state." I would welcome that, Governor, I replied, maintaining my composure despite the growing whispers around us. It was then that Governor Sterling glanced back at Caleb, who had finally approached, his face now composed, though still notably pale. Caleb, why didn't you mention that Senator Hayes would be attending tonight? We could have arranged a proper welcome. A flash of something embarrassment, crossed my brother's face before he recovered. An oversight on my part, Governor. My apologies. The governor turned back to me, his brow furrowing slightly. Hayes, is there a relation? The surname isn't that common. Before I could respond, Caleb stepped forward. Senator Hayes is my sister, Governor. Governor Sterling's surprise was evident. Your sister? I had no idea you had a sister in the Senate. He looked between us, clearly reassessing some internal narrative. Why haven't you ever mentioned this? The moment hung suspended, the nearby tables now openly watching the drama unfold. Caleb's career, built partially on our family connections and reputation, suddenly faced a complicated public revelation. Family and politics can be complex, Governor, Caleb offered weakly. Indeed, they can, I interjected smoothly, saving him from further explanation. But ultimately, we all serve the public in our own ways. Governor Sterling, a skilled politician himself, quickly recognized the undercurrents and pivoted. Well, this is a delightful discovery. We must have you both at the mansion soon. A family of public servants. Quite remarkable. As the governor moved to the next table, Caleb and I were left in an awkward tableau. Years of estrangement condensed into a single, public moment. Harper, he began, his voice low. I didn't know you would be here. Clearly, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Though as a U.S. Senator from this state, it would be unusual to exclude me from the invitation list. That's not what I meant, he said, discomfort evident in his stance. We should talk. Not here, but soon. Should we? I asked, meeting his gaze directly. After years of silence? After our parents have actively misrepresented my career to everyone in their circle? What exactly should we talk about, Caleb? Around us, the room had returned to its normal buzz of conversation, though I noticed several people watching our interaction with poorly disguised interest. Caleb glanced around, aware of the attention. This isn't the place. But yes, we should talk. Things are complicated. They always have been, I replied. But they're also very simple. I chose a different path than the one laid out for me. That shouldn't have made me a family pariah. Before he could respond, Owen gently touched my arm. The governor's wife is trying to get your attention, Harper. Indeed, across the room, the First Lady was gesturing for me to join her group. The revelation of my identity had clearly altered my status at the event. We'll continue this another time, I told Caleb, straightening my shoulders. I have people to meet. As I moved away, head held high, I felt a weight lifting, the burden of hiding, of being diminished, of accepting my family's narrative about my life. Here, in this room where I had entered as the disappointing Hayes, I was now being recognized as Senator Hayes, respected for my own accomplishments rather than measured against family expectations. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and conversations. Political leaders who had barely acknowledged my arrival now sought me out. Business executives expressed interest in my committee work. Through it all, I maintained my professional demeanor, neither gloating over the revelation, nor appearing affected by the years of family rejection it had exposed. As Owen and I finally prepared to leave, Governor Sterling approached once more, this time without Caleb in tow. Senator Hayes, he said quietly, I hope you'll forgive my ignorance earlier. Had I known of your relationship to my chief of staff, I would have ensured a more appropriate welcome. No apology necessary, Governor, I assured him. Family circumstances can be complicated. He nodded thoughtfully. Indeed, though I must say, having observed your work in the Senate, particularly on education reform, I find myself questioning the narrative I've heard about you through certain channels. You're clearly an exceptional public servant. Thank you, Governor. That means a great deal. As our car pulled away from the venue, Owen took my hand. You handled that with incredible grace. I've had years of practice, I replied, looking back at the illuminated hotel. But something feels different now. Like the truth has finally broken through. The truth was always there, Owen said gently. But now others can see it too. In that moment, I realized that while reconciliation with my family remained uncertain, I had achieved something perhaps more valuable. I had reclaimed my own narrative. No longer would I be defined by what the Hayes family said about me. I had written my own story, and now that story stood on its own merits for all to see. The revelation at the governor's gala created ripples that extended far beyond that single evening. By the next morning, several state political blogs had picked up the story of the Hayes siblings' reunion, complete with speculation about our family dynamics. The public narrative quickly shifted from questions about why I had been excluded from family events to wonder at how my achievements had been so consistently downplayed. 3 days after the gala, my office phone rang with a number I instantly recognized, but hadn't seen on my caller ID in years: my father's private line. "Harper," he began without preamble when I answered. "I understand you attended the governor's gala." "I did," I replied, keeping my tone neutral, as would be expected for a senator from the state. There was a pause, the silence heavy with unspoken history. "Your mother and I have been discussing recent developments. We feel it might be appropriate to have dinner while you're in the state to clear the air." The careful phrasing wasn't lost on me. Not an apology, not an admission of wrongdoing, merely an acknowledgement that circumstances had changed. My new position made me someone they could no longer dismiss or ignore. "I appreciate the invitation," I said carefully. "But I think before any family dinner, we need to have an honest conversation about the past several years." "The past is the past, Harper," my father replied, his tone suggesting irritation at my lack of immediate agreement. "Looking backwards serves no productive purpose." "I disagree," I said firmly. "You and Mom have actively misrepresented my career and life choices to your social circle for years. You've portrayed me as a failure when I've been succeeding on my own terms. That needs to be acknowledged before we can move forward." Another long silence followed. "Perhaps we've had different perspectives on your choices," he finally offered. "It's not about perspectives, Dad. It's about respect. You couldn't respect that I chose a different path from the one you prescribed. Instead of supporting me, you punished me for it. That hurt." The vulnerability in my last statement hung between us. In all our conflicts, I had rarely allowed myself to express the personal pain their rejection had caused. "Harper," my father said, his voice softening slightly, "family is complicated. Perhaps we could start fresh. Your position in the Senate is impressive. We can build from there." The qualified acknowledgement was so typical of my father, unable to simply say he was proud or that he had been wrong. Instead, offering conditional approval now that my success had become too prominent to deny. "I need time to think about this," I told him. "And if we do meet, I'd want Owen there as well. He's my family now. The family who supported me when you and Mom wouldn't." "As you wish," my father replied stiffly. "Let us know your decision." After hanging up, I sat in my office, emotions swirling. Part of me wanted to reject the overture outright, to tell my parents that they had lost the privilege of being in my life. Another part, the little girl who had always craved their approval, wanted to rush toward any possibility of reconciliation, no matter how qualified. Owen helped me find the middle path. "You don't have to decide everything at once," he counseled. "You can set boundaries while still leaving the door open." 2 weeks later, I met my parents at a private dining room in a discreet restaurant. Owen sat beside me, his quiet strength bolstering my resolve. The conversation was strained but civil, focusing primarily on surface-level topics: my committee assignments, Owen's work, the renovations to our DC apartment. When my mother finally broached the subject of our estrangement, her approach was typically indirect. "We may not have always understood your choices, Harper, but we never stopped caring." "Caring isn't the same as respecting," I replied evenly. "You didn't just not understand my choices. You actively denigrated them. You told people I had failed when I was succeeding. That goes beyond misunderstanding." My father shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps we were hasty in our judgments." It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get. Not we were wrong, but we were hasty, maintaining plausible deniability while offering a minimal concession. "Moving forward," I said carefully, "I need honesty. If you want to be part of my life, you need to respect the life I've built, my career, my marriage, my choices. I won't accept anything less. The dinner ended with tentative plans for future contact, but no real resolution. As we left, my mother embraced me stiffly, whispering, "We are proud of you, Harper." In our way. Those qualified words encapsulated our relationship perfectly, acknowledgement wrapped in conditions, acceptance limited by their way of seeing the world. Caleb proved more complicated. A week after the gala, he requested a private meeting at a coffee shop near my district office. When I arrived, he looked different than he had at the governor's event. Less polished, more human, with shadows under his eyes suggesting sleepless nights. "I owe you an apology," he said after we'd settled with our coffees. "Not just for the gala, but for years of complicity." His directness surprised me. "Complicity in the family narrative about you," he clarified. "I knew it wasn't accurate. I knew you were succeeding, making a real difference. But I never corrected them, never stood up for you." "Why didn't you?" I asked. The question that had haunted me for years finally spoken aloud. Caleb stared into his coffee. "It was easier not to. As long as you were the disappointment, I didn't have to question my own choices. I could be the success story without examining whether I was actually happy with the path I'd taken." "And are you happy?" His hesitation told me everything. "I'm successful by their measure," he finally said. "But watching you forge your own path, standing on your principles, even when it cost you family support, it's made me question things." Our conversation that day didn't immediately repair years of distance, but it opened a door. Unlike our parents, Caleb seemed genuinely interested in reestablishing a relationship based on honesty rather than appearances. Over the following months, we began exchanging occasional texts and calls, slowly rebuilding a connection separate from our parents' influence. The most unexpected reconciliation came from my grandmother, Doris. Following the gala revelation, she contacted me with an astonishing confession. She had been following my career closely all along, saving news articles about my legislative achievements and even watching committee hearings online. "I always believed in you," she told me during a private lunch at her assisted living facility. "But I was a coward. I should have defended you more openly to your parents." "You were the only one who showed any support at all," I reminded her gently. That meant everything to me. Doris took my hand, her paper-thin skin cool against mine. "I want you to know something. Your grandfather, my husband, was like you. Questioned everything, wanted to make a difference rather than just accumulate wealth. Your father rejected that side of himself to please his own father. When he saw it in you, so strong and undeniable, I think it frightened him. Reminded him of the path not taken." This revelation illuminated my family dynamics in a new light. Perhaps my father's rejection wasn't just about my choices, but about what those choices reflected back to him about his own life. As my first term in the Senate progressed, I channeled these personal insights into my legislative work. I became a leading voice on bills supporting family mental health resources and programs to help first-generation college students navigate systems their families couldn't guide them through. My personal experience of forging a path without family support gave me unique perspective on the challenges faced by those without built-in advantages. Owen and I began having serious conversations about starting our own family. The prospect of parenthood raised inevitable questions about what kind of family culture we wanted to create. "I know exactly what I don't want," I told Owen one night as we discussed the possibility. "I never want our child to feel that our love is conditional on them following a prescribed path." "We'll make mistakes," Owen reminded me. "All parents do. But we'll make different ones than your parents made." The journey toward creating our own family coincided with a gradual, cautious reconnection with my parents and Caleb. Holiday gatherings remained somewhat strained, but there was genuine effort on all sides. My mother made a point of asking about my legislative priorities. My father, in his own awkward way, began occasionally forwarding articles about my work with brief notes of approval. On my 40th birthday, my parents hosted a small dinner at their home, the first such invitation I'd received in over a decade. As we gathered in the formal dining room, where I'd experienced so many painful family interactions, my father surprised everyone by raising his glass in a toast. To Harper, he said, his voice gruff with emotion he rarely displayed, who had the courage to define success on her own terms. You've made a difference in ways that exceed what we could have imagined for you. It wasn't a full acknowledgement of past wrongs, but it was sincere appreciation of my path, something I had stopped expecting years ago. I accepted it for what it was, an imperfect olive branch from an imperfect family. Looking around that table, at my parents trying in their limited way to bridge the gulf between us, at Caleb with his newfound willingness to question the family script, at Owen, who had shown me what unconditional support truly meant, I realized that all relationships exist on a spectrum of health and dysfunction. Perfect reconciliation might not be possible, but perhaps something genuine could exist in the middle ground. The deepest lesson of my journey wasn't about politics or even family, but about authenticity. By refusing to conform to others' definitions of success and worth, I had discovered my own. The path had been harder, lonelier at times, but ultimately led to a life aligned with my values rather than someone else's expectations. As I look back now, I see that being underestimated was indeed my greatest strength. It forced me to rely on my own judgment, to build resilience, to find value in myself rather than in others' approval. Those qualities served me well, not just in politics, but in the more fundamental human challenge of living an authentic life. I often wonder if you've been underestimated or dismissed by those whose approval you sought. How did it shape you? Did it break you down or build you up? Sometimes, our greatest strengths emerge from our deepest wounds, if we're brave enough to forge our own path through the pain. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it resonated with you, please consider subscribing and sharing with others who might need to hear that being underestimated can become their superpower, too. Let me know in the comments about your own experiences with family expectations. Sometimes, sharing our stories is the first step toward healing. Until next time, remember that true success isn't measured by others' standards, but by the courage to live authentically, according to your own.